Amen. How's everybody tonight? All right, amen. I've got a good friend of mine. I met where you meet all of your good friends. I met him online playing video games. That's right. Okay? So, a quick story. This is how it happens. We got it, okay? So, if you've ever, any of you that have do that sort of thing, I guess this is more of a confession than a testimony, but this really is about testimony. So, I'm playing a game called Destiny. It's an online game where you shoot aliens. Okay, you're shooting hostile aliens. It's one of those things. So I'm playing. The whole family plays. Well, I'm sitting here, and there comes an avatar that runs across, and the name on the top is Pastor Dave 88. And I thought, hey, there are more people like me on here, maybe. So Jan's standing there, my lovely wife, and I said, hey, I wonder if that guy's really a pastor. And she said, yeah, probably not. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, hey, But long story short, we kind of made a connection on there, and I got to talking, and I heard Dave's testimony, and I'm going to let him do most of that. But I do want to share a Bible verse with you today, because a lot of you have come because maybe you have questions about your faith, or maybe you have somebody who's harassing every Facebook post you make, somebody that's not a believer. And one thing I want us to remember, if you look at Colossians 4, verses 5 and 6, it says, walk in wisdom to those who are outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be with grace and seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Now, I think it's very important. There's a whole lot of things to unpack out of that little scripture, but the most important thing, I believe, is it's how to answer each one. And that when we're going to get equipped, we're going to be moved by the Spirit to go out and share our faith. What I want us to remember, though, is that we are not here to answer arguments. We're answering people. And I think as Christians, we always have got to remember that very, very important thing, that we're trying to win people and not arguments. So I'm going to let Dave, who's gone from the unbelieving side to the believing side in a real powerful way, share his testimony before Patrick comes up to share with us.
Hey, thank you, Justin. Hey, just to kind of let you know, I'm actually not the teacher for the night. We have someone who's much better than myself. Patrick is going to be coming up here in a little bit. You guys are probably thinking, why is this tattooed freak up here? We're trying to have like a church event. Who is this guy? I'm actually a pastor at a church in Clarksville, Tennessee. Just like Justin said, we met online shooting aliens, not real people. So he asked me to come out and just kind of share with you guys how it is I came to faith. And I guess I kind of really have to start way back in my childhood. I was about 13 years old whenever I moved from Grand Rapids, Michigan. You guys are like, man, stupid Yankee up there. I do sound like a northerner still. I refuse to lose my Michigan accent. I don't know why. I've been here since I was 12. So I moved from Michigan down here to southern Kentucky, Todd County. I believe you guys play against each other in football. I never supported their football team, so, no worries there. I was a band geek, sorry. I just marched. Yeah, it's kind of lame. I hate cricket. So I moved down here, and I get to this area where, everybody goes to church. You think we're living in the Bible Belt or something. Like, I go to school on Monday through Friday, and they're talking about, oh, man, at church, this happened. At church, I totally slept, and, stuff like that. And so I want to figure out what this whole thing is about. I want to know what this church thing is. And so at the age of 13, I approached my parents, which no 13 ever said before, hey, I want to go to church. Like, 13-year-olds just don't say that, if they don't raise in church, And so I go and tell them. Now, just to give you a little bit about myself at the time, I was what you would refer to as like a dork. Okay, I was just, kind of going through a phase in my life. I wore a lot of dark clothing. I was just so hardcore and emo, and I wrote poetry, and I was afraid of clowns, all that stuff. So, just a real big loser, And so, while I was going through this phase, however, whenever I went to the church that Sunday, like I decided, I was like, okay, we'll just go to that one. It's like closest to home, so I don't have to wake up as early, so we'll just go to that one, go check it out, see what it's like. It's a little place called Sharon Grove Baptist. It's a great place now, so I decided I'm going to go visit this church, and as I get there, the pastor comes in, and of course, everybody gets their bulletin, and he's getting ready to talk. He's, about to bring the word, and, whatever that means, and so, he's up there talking, and then he looks at me, and he just eye contact, and he stares. And he kind of hesitated, didn't say anything for a few minutes, and he's trying to figure out, like, why he recognizes me. Now, keep in mind, whenever I was at this church, I was dressed completely normal. My hair was fixed perfectly fine. In fact, I came because everybody said you got to wear your church clothes. Those are your church shoes. We've all heard the phrase before. So, I had my church shoes on and my church clothes, and my hair was fixed, and I'm sitting there, but he recognized me. Now, this guy, I don't even remember his name, he sits there and he looks at me and he finally realizes he saw me outside of church and in those dark clothing with my hair not quite so nice, all loser-like and everything. And so he takes a moment, he says, hey, everybody, you know what? Fold up your bulletin. Just fold it up, put it in your pocket, save that for next week. Something else has been brought to my attention. Uh-oh. And then he looks at me again. I'm sitting there, and I feel the full scrutiny, and he's staring at me, and he says, what is wrong with the youth today, and why do they feel the urge to be different? Now, I don't know about you, but as a 13-year-old, you're pretty impressionable, and my impression of church was, this is not the place for me. I'm not welcome here. I don't belong here. And so I ran. And for 10 years, I was an atheist. And I'm not just talking about an atheist who just sits on the internet trolling, blah, 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 the Big Bang and, evolution and, No, I wasn't that type of atheist. I was a very, very militant, outspoken atheist. I was the atheist. I guess you could say if I was a biblical character, I would be Saul. I wasn't just, comfortable with not being a Christian myself. I wanted to destroy Christianity because I truly felt that it was evil. And see, something I want you to understand about people who are outside of the faith is they actually see Christianity as something that's wrong with the world. They're not bad people, they just have a bad impression. And so as I'm watching this from the outside and I'm just running as hard as I can, and for 10 years, it was the 10 hardest years of my life, I stood outside of the church. And see, my first church experience was, you're not welcome, you don't belong here, you don't look like us, you can't be one of us. Even though I dress nice, even though I fixed my hair, even though I came fully ready to be a part of them. Fast forward 10 years later, every friend of mine that I find out is a Christian, I either quit being friends with them or I try to get them to no longer be Christian. So at this point in time, I assume that none of my friends are Christian. I've had time and time again people come to me, I'm worried about you. What about this argument? What about that argument? You need this in your life. You need to be a part of this. And time again, I just felt like it was wrong, like I should not be a part of this, like I did not need this in my life. There was just something missing in the way that they were approaching me. And so I find this friend, she was actually my real estate agent. I was buying a house, I was 21 years old. And so, what does every 21-year-old do with a bunch of money they have saved up to buy a house? No, not really. However, every 21-year-old who buys a house typically loses it to foreclosure, and I'm part of that deal too. So I buy this house, and I make this friend, and her husband's deployed, and her dog dies, so she asked me to bury her dog, and she becomes like a sister to me. She's older. There's no romantic, just to get that out of your head. So she's like a sister of mine. And her husband becomes like a brother of mine. And I just kind of become part of this family. Their kids, they're military. They don't have any family there. So her kids, they look up to me as Uncle Dave. And for the longest time, I had no idea that this woman and this man and their kids, that they were all Christians. Because if I had known, I never would have spent time with them. I would have ran away as fast as I could. And I know that time and time again, for the many years that we were friends, from 21 until 23, for the 2 years, I guess, really, math, I know that I had so many times I had offended them. Because, like I said, I was not just an atheist, I was the atheist. Everything out of my mouth was about why Christianity was wrong, how stupid Christians are, why it all needs to be, just go away. And I know that so many times I offended them, but they never said anything. For 2 years, they showed me such incredible grace, Sadly, I have to say that at the age of 21 to 23, that's the very first time I ever experienced grace from a Christian. Just as Justin said, that may all your conversations with outsiders be full of grace, seasoned with salt. She finally comes around. We're talking about some history things, and so she pulls up on her computer this website and starts playing this thing for me. It's because apparently what we were talking about was talked about at her church the previous Sunday. Now, obviously, she's been trying to figure out, how am I going to finally tell him that I'm a Christian? How am I going to finally try to open this door for him? And so she finds her moment, and she pulls it up, and I'm watching this, and I see a whole church service that's happening at a high school, kind of like you guys, and I watched this, and it was just so interesting and intriguing, but most importantly, oh my gosh, she's a Christian. And for the first time, I didn't feel like running. For the first time, I felt like I needed to stick around. I felt like this person has it together. This person has my best interests in mind. And so she says, hey, I know you're not really a church person, and you probably didn't even know that I was a Christian. However, my church is pretty chill. They're pretty cool. We'd love, if you want to go, you're welcome. I'll never forget those words. Just like I'll never forget the words of whenever I was 13 and he said, what's wrong with the youth? I remember her saying, hey, if you want to go, you're welcome. Fast forward almost a month, I was supposed to go this Sunday, and then this happened, I didn't. I was supposed to go this Sunday, and then this happened, I didn't. Fast forward, I finally make it. I decide this Sunday I'm going to go kicking and screaming. I'm going to go just to prove to my friend Sam that I don't belong in church, but out of respect, I'm going to go, right? And so I get to her house at like 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Church service starts at 11 there, and, I'm wearing like, last time I went to church, I dressed nice, right? Had the pants, had the Sunday shoes, the right hair. I show up to her house wearing short shorts. I'm talking like, guys should not wear shorts this short. A white, dirty T-shirt that smelled like beer from the night before. My hair is kind of more like this at the time. Made sure all my tattoos are showing. I had stretched ears, the brightest green plugs you could find, like, just huge, big green earplugs, so everybody sees them. And I get there to her house, and her dog's out there running around. It rained the night before. She's out there running around. He comes up, puts a big, muddy paw print right on my shirt. And I'm like, yes, like even better, like I look worse. Now it's so great. And so we get in their van and we get down to the high school where it meets. I'm like, oh, it's at a high school. That's weird, And so we get there and I see someone greeting people, like, right where the parking lot meets the sidewalk. And there's a guy, like, he is like the epitome of nerd, okay? Like, he's got the khakis, the button-up shirt that's tucked in, the perfectly groomed hair, the shoes and belt that match. Like, the ladies couldn't even match the shoes and belt that well. Like, it was, like, dude had it going. Like, he was church through and through. And so I see him, and he reminded me of every reason why I didn't go to church. And I think, all right, he's greeting people. Bring on the judgment. Right? Like, I see this guy, and I think, all right, I'm going to get there, and he's going to judge me, and he's going to turn his back. He's going to stick his nose up. Still going to get invited to Cracker Barrel afterwards. But, he's going to totally turn it up to me, and I'm going to prove to Sam I don't belong here. So I'm walking up there. I'm excited. I'm going along. He says, hey, man, so glad you're here. What? Wait, what did you say? I'm just so glad you're here. I'm like, dude, like, there are Christians here. Like, they can see you. You're not getting invited to lunch afterwards. Like, you are guilty by association right now. Like, what is going through your head? I'm just so glad to see you. My heart melted. In that moment, my heart began to crack. The ice that had been built up on my heart for 10 years was falling off. I get up to the door. As I get inside, my friend Sam, she's introducing me to a couple people saying, hey, this is so-and-so and this. So I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And I'm just really trying to, like, piece all this together. Like, what is going on right now? I'm feeling something, and I don't know what it is. I get inside the auditorium. We meet at a high school theater, an auditorium, And so I go in and I sit down way in the back because, I want my exit. And there was something that happened while I was sitting there. I start thinking of all the reasons why I need to get up and walk out. My best friend, I turned away from Jesus. I have this friend that has this. I have this friend that has this. I'm a hypocrite. What are my friends going to think of me? And while I'm sitting there, Chris, my lead pastor, he stands up there on stage. Now, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't even know I exist, let alone that I'm in the room. He stands there, and every time I have a thought as to why I needed to get up and run, why I needed to get up and leave, well, he would respond to it. And then I would have another thought, and he would respond to that. And the longer I'm sitting there, I'm kind of going through this head, and I'm a very rational, very scientific-driven person. I'm having a very irrational situation happen in front of me. This is impossible. This cannot exist. This man cannot read my mind. Then it hit me. There's someone who is telling him what to say. In that moment, I'm standing there and I'm realizing everything I've said, and I'm just trying to hold it together. And then the band comes out and they sing the song, How He Loves, right? That's such a great one. He's singing the song, and for the first time I hear the words of His grace was an ocean. We're all drowning. We're all sinking. And I accepted Christ that day, August 11th of 2014. Coming up on 5 years. It was amazing. Thank you. But what's the point of all this? Why does it matter for me to come and tell you what happened to me? Well, this is it. In a letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it says, if I could speak all the languages of earth and angels but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, and if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it. But if I didn't love others, I would gain nothing. You guys here over the next few days, you're going to learn so much, and that's great, and I hope that empowers you and that you guys are able to take this and go out and challenge the world. But you guys know somebody. You guys don't know me, but you know a me. It's the person you work with. It's that relative that comes around every so often. It's that neighbor that never mows their grass. You guys have somebody in your life, and you have a choice. When I was 13, I had a guy that decided that he wanted to prove a point rather than be the difference in my life. When I was 23, I had a woman enter into my life that said, you know what? I'm going to love you. You see, all the people in my past, all the people who tried, the thing that they were missing was love. So you could be someone's bad church experience, or you could be the difference. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for Revived Church. God, thank you for the work that they're doing here. Thank you for Patrick as he comes up and gives us just an incredible talk. God, thank you for the opportunity that I had to come up and share my testimony with these fine people. God, it's in your name, and you are so amazing. And all God's people said, amen.
Okay, so I guess now you can actually run into some pretty good friends online. I still am not to the point where I will look for a babysitter on Craigslist. But Dave is good people. So I guess now it's time to introduce you to Patrick, and I'll let him do a lot of that himself. But Patrick, if you were here last year and you got to hear him, you know what a joy it was. Patrick has degrees in neuroscience and immunology. Is that right? And he's also a pastor at 4th Avenue Church of Christ. Those things do go together. So if you'd give him your attention, I'm going to just hand it over. Would you like to stand?
Them so quickly. There they are. Well, that sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? It makes me sound like I've got a bit of an accent. They'll tweak that later. Let me move up here, see if that... Are we... We're happy? We're working on it, are we? Okay, good. Yes, and that was a tall person. What's that? Did you? You're a bad man. Briefly, I was raised by Christian parents. I did all this last year, so I'm going to do it very, very briefly. I was raised by Christian parents. I've always been a bit off the bubble and very scientific, very rational. Got my first degree when I was 17. Ended up with 2 PhDs in neuroscience. Still work with the Ohio State University and Purdue and a few others, teaching the doctors what's going on with brain wiring, basically, so we don't get into the weeds too much. What's going on with brain development, brain damage, closed head injuries, PTSD, Alzheimer's, that sort of thing. And that's why I came back to faith, with science. Working with little synapses that require more than 3,000 different things to be there in the right ratios and fire in the right ways at exactly the right time. Explosions don't do that. You know, while we could argue forever, if you wish, about whether it was six-day creation or whether God, that's all a metaphor and God did it over many billions of years, the fact is somebody had to be behind it, no matter how it was unfolded. Now I find myself in an odd situation. I'm a pastor who never had a class on how to be a pastor. Never had a class, have no degrees in Bible. I have no degrees in how to preach, and if you've ever heard me, you'll know that. I work still, and I'm very active in research with a great deal of people who don't believe at all. So people will every now and then ask me to come speak to them because here they've got a believing scientist, and it's almost like, come see the monkey boy. It's very odd. I want to tell you something about atheists. Most of them are nice, moral people. They just weren't born where you were born and weren't told what you were told. They got a different story. And they believe their story just as much as you believe your story. And whenever I talk to a Muslim, for example, one of the things, you got to watch out. I'm a Church of Christ guy. When you start approaching, I start heading for the baptistry. So be careful. I've baptized people so many times by accident. Lost a couple, don't want to talk about it. I was talking to a Muslim, and he was afraid to have lunch with me, and so I looked at him and I said, do you think there's anything I could say to you to get you to give up Islam? And he said, no. I said, well, I don't think there's anything you could say to me to get me to give up Jesus. So I think we're safe for lunch. If, however, we come at these people as our enemies to be shouted down and debated, we're not going to get anywhere. And neither should we, because that's not the way anybody wants to be approached. You're asking somebody for a lifetime commitment. You don't walk up to a girl that you want to propose to, and instead of proposing, say, have you met my lawyers? We have this case. All of this evidence would suggest that I have a life plan for you. No, we don't do this. It's all relationship. But we need to know how to talk to atheists because the percentage of people calling themselves atheists has doubled in America in the last 20 years. And in some populations, like the millennials, the number of the nones, N-O-N-E-S, they have no religion, has more than tripled. And they are becoming the majority. Sometimes America will go through this idea that, somebody will say, we are a Christian nation. I'm not sure we ever were, but if you were, you're not. And you're going to be in the minority, So how do you ask? How do you talk? Well, I decided to do this by talking about the new atheists, they're called. There are 4 of them. Actually, there are only 3 now because one is passed. This would be Daniel Dennett, who's a philosopher, Richard Dawkins, who's perhaps the most famous of them all, who's an evolutionary biologist out of Oxford. You have Sam Harris, who's a son of a famous atheist himself, and he's very, very dangerous because he's exceptionally good-looking and the ladies like him. So you can Google him later, ladies. But he writes books such as God is Not Good. He has he's very anti-God. And then you've got, let's see, we did Richard, we did Daniel, we did, and Chris. Chris is the one who's passed. Chris Hitchens, who, very famous British atheist. I was asked to answer them a few years ago, read all of their books, and was actually quite depressed because none of the books were that good. I love a good argument. I love a good, let's set it up. I read atheist literature almost every day. I subscribe to their magazines. They have Skeptic, Skeptical Inquirer, North American Atheist, American Atheist. They have several different ones. I read them. And every so often I'll think, okay, I got somebody, he's making a good argument here. And then when they start, I'll go, oh, no. Now, they probably feel that way about our stuff too, but you need to know the atheists are saying things about us that we can answer if you're willing to engage with them a bit. They paint Christians as people who are not allowed to think. You're not allowed to ask questions. You just have to believe it and have faith in it. And maybe you even have gone to a church like that before. I've listened to a preacher. I had some bad preachers too. I listened to a preacher who would harangue the congregation, don't think, just believe and do it. And I'm sitting there at 14 thinking, I just thought. I can't stop thinking. My wife knows this. My wife's a great woman. She's American. She's normal. She always likes me to bring that up. But she will leave me alone, and I can sit in a room for 8 hours and read a book and not know time has passed. And I can be standing there looking out my back door, and it looks like I'm just standing wasting time, but she knows I'm working on something. And my parents found that out earlier. They would put me into timeout. They didn't call it timeout back then. They said, go to your room, or sit on that stool, and that was supposed to be punishment. And then they'd say, all right, you're done now. And I'd be going, no, not yet. I was working on stuff. And so the idea of don't think, most Christians, we're allowed to think, are we not? How many times do we read books about our faith to see whether or not we believe and answers? But Daniel Dennett says, quote, people of all faiths consider it demeaning to ask God tough questions. Is that true? No. But people who don't go to church think that's true. They think you're not allowed to have doubts. I had a young man in my office not too long ago that said, I love this church. People love me. They reach out to me. I wish I could be a Christian, but I know I can't be. And I looked at him and I said, why not? And he said, because I have too many questions. And I said, who told you that you're not allowed to have a lot of questions? He didn't know. Sam Harris calls faith, quote, nothing more than the license religious people give one another to keep believing when reason fails. Hang on. Harris also wrote, quote, it should go without saying. That's always interesting. When people say it should go without saying, then they say it. It should go without saying that these rival belief systems are all equally uncontaminated by evidence. Well, let's back up a bit. If opinions need to be supported by evidence, let's begin with this one. How does Harris know that Christians don't support their beliefs with evidence? I'm not going to answer that question. What I'm going to do is say, you need to turn it around and ask questions. We don't attack. We don't defend. We just ask questions. He cites atheists in his books. He does not cite Christians. He doesn't know what we say. He hasn't heard us. He hasn't read our books. I've read his books. He has not read ours. Richard Dawkins tells us that faith is, quote, a kind of mental illness, a state of mind that leads people to believe something, it doesn't matter what, in the total absence of supporting evidence, not only in the absence of evidence, but in the teeth of evidence. Really? He might be surprised if he cracked open the Bible and saw that Hebrews chapter 11 doesn't tell us to have blind faith. It says faith is the substance and evidence. Substance and evidence. We're supposed to be thinking and applying rules of logic to our faith. This isn't something which we just say and then say, believe it, that's it. No. The new atheist, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, even say this: Thomas was chewed out by Jesus for asking for proof. That would indicate to me they've never read that story. Did Jesus chew out Thomas? No. Jesus instead, when he found out Thomas had a lack of faith, supplied him proof. Now that seems rather scientific to me. I need proof, then here is proof. And in fact, the proof was strong enough that Thomas and the rest of them were willing to die for Jesus. So it was quite a lot of proof. It wasn't a little proof or maybe proof. It was a lot of proof. John chapter 20 and verse 31 says that Jesus did signs and miracles regularly for the purpose of supplying proof. The Bible has, in fact, a long list of witnesses to tell us all these things are true. And this is where a lot of atheists will jump up and say, oh, but you see, you're getting that from your book. We don't believe your book. It's not acceptable. Well, just a question, though. Is it acceptable to get knowledge from a large amount of witnesses? Is that acceptable? And they will hem and haw, but please remember this. Almost everything we know about first century Palestine, or dwarf stars, neutrinos, state capitals, vitamins, sports scores, we believe because somebody we call credible told us. Have you not thought of this before? They'll say, well, that's not the Bible, that's not scientific, stacking up your witnesses. Well, what is? For example, you may not know this, you can get your PhD in paleontology, that's a study of fossils, paleontology, without ever touching a real fossil, but only molds and pictures and descriptions. Why? Because we don't have enough of them to ship them around for every student. Well, does that mean I don't believe that those people deserve their doctorate? Not at all. They believe what they were told by credible witnesses. So do I. So do I. I have a friend who's an MD, have lots of friends who are MDs, and he works in neurology. And I had a question to ask him. A question about a certain nerve that snakes down through the face and down through here. And he answered it, and I believed him. How stupid of me. Well, no. No, I'm seriously, he's just a witness. He didn't prove anything. No, but we take credible witnesses all the time. I get on airplanes a lot, and I have yet to check out the credentials of the pilot. A guy shows up wearing the right stuff, walks in a room, door shut. I open a book. I don't think, I don't have enough proof. I need a bit more proof than this. No, you fly. And you do all right, too. Somebody serves you food in a restaurant. Yeah. It's just been safe. And people wash their hands. No, we accept things like this. So we have witnesses, but the Bible also appeals to reason. To remember, the whole book of Proverbs is about wisdom. Get wisdom. Think about things. Don't just do things. Think about things. And says, come, let us reason together. Do you remember that passage? Or taste and see that the Lord is good. Give him a try. Give God a try. Same way you test drive a car. God doesn't mind. Date God for a while if you need to before you make the big commitment. He's quite all right with it. And in fact, the book of Proverbs says if you refuse to think about things and reason it, it rebukes you in chapter 1, verse 22. Well, what about evidence? Because they go on quite a bit about evidence. Dawkins' friends, for example, Swinburne and McGrath, have written over a dozen books about the evidence. These are his friends. They work with him at Oxford. A bend to Oxford. Alistair McGrath, Swinburne, John Polkinghorne, J.C. Lennox, all of these are believers. And they're as high or higher than Richard Dawkins in the sciences. They have written over a dozen books about the evidence, but Richard Dawkins, their friend who works with them, quotes none of them. Because he's not read them. Because he refuses to look at the evidence, while telling us we refuse to look at the evidence. In fact, as you read the New Atheist, you find that they tend to quote themselves, each other, almost entirely. Now, I'm going to tell on my church. The Churches of Christ went through a really bad sideways spell where we got to where we were the only ones going to heaven. Sorry about the rest of you. Nice try. But we were the only ones going, and not all of us were going. Only the Churches of Christ that agreed with our particular Churches of Christ. We've gotten over that, by the way, by and large. There are still some tribes out there like that, but most of us have gotten to become a lot more Christian than that. But during that time, and I've read the books during that time, a writer will quote so many people to prove his point, but they're all in that particular group of the Church of Christ. And I can still remember being 12 years old and walking into my father's office and making a terrible mistake and letting him know what I thought. I said, this is intellectual incest. I said, there's no outside, you're quoting your friends. If all the people who agree with you are already your friends, that's not enough. Oh, did I get in trouble? But that's true also if you're a scientist who refuses to read outside of your circle. Instead, you only quote each other. One of the world's experts on Christian theology wrote a book specifically for Dawkins to educate him on the evidence. Dawkins claims that he read it, but there's no evidence that he has because he's never quoted it, referred to it, or even spoken against it. It seems that the atheists are the ones whose faith is blind here. I know a lot of Christians who read atheist material. How many atheists do you know who read Christian material? Do you understand what I'm saying? So challenge that, but do it in a very loving way. The depth of ignorance, by the way, is such that one man described Dawkins and Harris trying to describe what Christianity is all about, like, quote, Archie Bunker explaining the errors of Zen Buddhism. Now, you have to be of a certain age to understand that. But it's very true. Or again, America, a certain age, Barney Fife explaining quantum physics. Perhaps that would do a little bit better. Or Kim Kardashian explaining anything. In the Christian faith, faith means a courageous trust in an object that you have good reason to trust. It is not blind. God has never called us to blind faith. Never use that phrase because it absolutely gives our enemy all kinds of weapons. My faith is not blind. It would be a lot more convenient for my life if there were no God. Because there is a God that requires certain things of me. If I could get around the evidence, I would. But I can't. The evidence is there. We talked a lot about the evidence last year. I don't know if you guys recorded that or not or put it up somewhere. If you did, then it's still up there, I imagine. But faith is trust in something you have good reason to believe. So what kinds of trust? There are 4 kinds of trust. And this is a bit sciencey, but I'm going to try to make it not, all right? We have faith in our own minds. That's usually forgotten by those who praise the scientific method. By the way, I have a 4-year-old grandson. I have a 7, 4, and 1-year-old grandson and a 2-year-old granddaughter. My son-in-law, who was very troubled by the shootings in Dallas and the shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana, prayed at their breakfast table that God would forgive us for our mistakes. The 4-year-old at the amen turned to the 7-year-old and he said, he was talking about you, Lucas. He said, you've been making many mistakes because you don't apply the scientific method. This is a 4-year-old. That's my boy. Fenroe, and that's my laddie right there. We have to take the existence and efficacy, that means how well they work, of our minds for granted. We cannot locate a mind or prove a mind. We just know we have one, and we use it. When Dawkins speaks of faith, he says it's a misfiring of the brain. But wait a minute. He uses a brain to say our brains are misfiring. But that doesn't work. Could it be his brain is misfiring, and that's why he thinks ours is? There was an insane man on the streets of Glasgow, Scotland, west of Scotland, where we were from. And he was harmless, but he was plainly odd, professionally odd. He had been released many times, and he would approach strangers on the streets and say, no, I'm sane. I have papers to prove it. Where are yours? Well, that's okay. He had a point. I told my wife I needed it on my card, treated and released, just as a way to help out here. But the fact is, when our brains do calculus, scientists will say, well, then you can rely upon them. But when our brains tell us there's a creator, we can't. Upon what evidence do you base that assumption? They have none, by the way. And so you don't get upset. In other words, just ask them, your brain tells you that my brain isn't working right because your brain has amassed certain stuff. However, I can eat with a fork. I can drive a car. I keep my insurance up to date. I have raised a family. My brain seems to be working pretty well. So what is your evidence that when it tells me to believe in God, that part of the brain has misfired? Put the burden back on them. The second level of faith is trust in our senses. How do you know you're listening to Patrick? How do you know that hot is hot? Or that sparrows are on the ground looking for food, or that your dog is sleeping? How do you know any of these things? You take it in via your senses. And most of us believe that our senses are pretty good at doing this. Now, we know you can fool the senses. We know that. We can spin you around, or we can put you in a house that's on a level and makes it look like things are going, uphill when they're going down. We can fool some of it, but you know you're being fooled. When you walk back out in the real world, your senses work pretty well. You get ice cream, you don't slam it in the side of your head. You know, in fact, that it's cold. You get ice cream, you know, you don't go, whoa, mine's cold. You understand, your senses all work. When we look at our world and we determine that it makes sense that God created it, that's the second measure of reason. First is our own minds. The second is our senses. The third is testimonial evidence. We get this all the time from parents, teachers, street signs. I saw signs that said Owensboro this way. I didn't go, according to who? I didn't pull off the side of the road and say, you're not getting me. That's just ridiculous, that is. Now, I've got a GPS system that wants to kill me. There's no question. Say, turn left here. And I'm looking, that's a 1,400-foot drop. Makes me realize that maybe I should have paid attention when it wanted me to go a certain way before. Now it wants to kill me. But we believe street signs. We believe voices over the airways. Whenever we'll hear a siren. Last time I was here, we had a siren almost every day because a tornado was somewhere around. And we believe it. Now, you might respond to it or you might not respond to it, but you don't go, that's nothing. No, well, it could be something. We believe little shapes that show up on computers in our pockets. We call them text, and they modify our behavior. We might look and it says, come pick me up. My class is over sooner than I thought. And we get up and we drive across town. Why? Because shapes showed up out of nowhere. All of this is called testimonial evidence. Evidence from other people that is delivered to us, and we respond. By the way, that's why the lack of footnotes and a bibliography in books by atheists is stunning. The top four atheists, try to find footnotes. Try to find a good bibliography. Christians love footnotes and bibliography. I don't know if you've found that out. One of my favorite writers is Gregory Boyd, and half of his books, almost, are footnotes and bibliography. Testimony. Dawkins says he didn't come to where he was by, quote, reading a holy book. So, how did you get where you are? It'll be by testimony, senses, by the use of the mind, by listening to people tell him about things he's never seen and looking at pictures of fossils he's never held, taken by people he's never met, explained by strangers he assumes exist. Sounds a lot like what we do. You see, scientific evidence, and I love science. I live for science. It's based on faith. Exactly the same sort of fact as informed Christians have in God. Scientists always base their faith on trust in the mind, trust in the senses, trust in other people. In fact, there's a word for it, positivism. Positivism is the idea that only truths grounded in science and scientific evidence are worth believing. However, follow me, positivism, remember, the definition is only things grounded in scientific evidence are worth believing. You cannot prove that by the use of the scientific method. That was your brain just going. It's rather like when I was working on my doctoral thesis dissertation in this country, and the man was leaning over me with red face, yelling at me because of some arguments I was making. He said, "There are no absolutes." I looked at him and I said, "Does that include that statement?" And it got real uncomfortable in the room. And it took me a little bit longer to get that doctorate. The fourth level of how we turn evidence into belief is religious. Faith in God is on a higher level than scientific faith because we go out further on a limb with it. We're taking more risk with faith in God. The guy down the street that drinks anything he can find, smokes anything he can find, and swallows any pills he picks up, sleeps with any girl he can, all that. What if when we die, we're dead like Grover, we're dead all over, it's nothing matters anymore? Then his life made more sense than yours. We're going out on a limb here. I'd say that requires a bit of respect. It's kind of like my son, he's now a civilian, but when he was in the Marine Corps, when he would fast rope out of helicopters, that took a little bit of faith. All of us love America. Not all of us are fast roping out of helicopters. Some would question, they'll say, but that religious, is that real evidence? I've got to check the time here. Yeah, it is as unreasonable to demand that all the evidence in your faith conform to scientific evidence as it would be to demand that your wife prove that she is faithful mathematically. No, you don't do it that way. You do it through trust, and you do it through reason, and you do it through testimony. Or that I want you to give a purely philosophical proof that you were not drunk last Easter. Go. You can't do it. Why? You're using the wrong tool. You use philosophy for philosophy. You use different things for different things. But even here, Dawkins complains. He says that if God were real, we wouldn't be able to know much about him via the evidence. And then he says, because we can't know about God via the evidence, he must not be real. He complains that God cannot be knowable if he exists because he'd be too great for us to ever really know him. And then he complains whenever he finds a doctrine like the Trinity, which is too obscure. Well, excuse me, but that's a kid that doesn't want to play or not play. That's a kid that doesn't want to be inside or outside. Buddy, pick a team. If religion is more than about just shadows in our minds, some mysteries are inevitable. I want to just tell you, though, if you know anything about quantum physics, you know that the more we know about it, the weirder the universe is. That something, if you don't know what quantum physics works great, stick with physics, classical physics. But if you go too big or too small, physics breaks down. It doesn't work. That's where quantum physics comes in. Something can be so small it can go through the middle of itself without touching itself. I know. But it's true. A thing can be in two different places at the same time. Yeah, it can. And then we look and say Trinity and salvation and Jesus dying, that's just too weird. Really? Have you paid attention? What's really weird is the universe in which we live. Dawkins, by the way, lies about a lot of stuff, and I'm sorry, but he does. He's the world's most famous atheist now. He used to be the second most famous, but the most famous was Anthony Flew, F-L-E-W, until Anthony, about 6 years ago, in his late 70s, early 80s, said, there is a God. Oh, that didn't go over well. So now Dawkins is the most famous, and he says this, quote, fundamentalists know they are right because they've read the truth in a holy book, and they know in advance that nothing will budge them from their belief. The truth of the holy book is an axiom, not the end product of reasoning. In other words, you just believe it, you didn't reason it. The book is true, and if evidence seems to contradict it, it is the evidence that must be thrown out, not the book. End of quote. My response, upon what evidence do you base that? And then the room gets quiet. Every time. He lists no sources, no interviews, no examples. It seems that Dawkins has found a quicker way of dealing with this than throwing evidence out, and that is to never read it in the first place. I have a lot more to say about this, but we've only got about 5 more minutes here. I'm going to go ahead and do my 5 minutes, and if you have questions, I'll answer. Is that all right, guys? Won't charge overtime. One thing that you will often hear is, if God is real, why don't scientists believe in him? Here's your response. Why should you care what scientists believe about God? Do you care what union plumbers think about minor league baseball? Well, let's just do it that way. What do union plumbers believe about God? What do minor league catchers believe about God? Why is it that we believe scientists know more about believing and not believing in God than the other guys do? Upon what evidence? And Dennett suggests, in fact, a new name for those who do not believe in God. They call themselves brights. Have you heard that? That's what atheists call themselves now, brights. You're them. Really? It's nice when you get to make up your own name, isn't it? I shall be known as benevolent potentate. Are scientists too bright to believe? All right, here are the truth. Only 40% of American scientists say they believe in God. And that's in a country where about 12 to 13% of the population call themselves atheists. So that's quite staggering, that only 40% of scientists say they believe in God of any kind. In fact, Dennett puts it this way, quote, the higher one's intelligence or education level, the less one is likely to be religious or hold beliefs of any kind. All right, that's not actually true, but isn't that interesting? Is he saying that buying bits of paper from institutions whose job it is to supply those bits of paper makes one intelligent? Do you understand what I'm saying? To get a degree in geology, let's say, from a school whose job it is to supply degrees in geology, that's evidence that you're more intelligent? I'm not certain that it is. I've got 2 PhDs, and sometimes I'm as dumb as a rock. My wife, if you don't believe me, you may call my wife for a list of illustrations. Does tipping test tubes, spinning particle accelerators, chipping fossils, or thinking systematically about the fruits of such activities really convey special insight into the knowledge of reality? No. It just helps you do that. Tip test tubes or run particle simming. That's what it helps you do. That's what people, I can rewire your brain, and I can't fix a toaster. Having degrees and having an incredible amount of knowledge in one area does not qualify you in any other area. In fact, you may not know that, I bet you don't know this, science is at war over Antarctica because there's oil in Antarctica, which means there were tropics there, which means dinosaurs and tropics and all that sort of thing were there. The war is, how did they get there? When did it break loose and go down there? Geologists have a different argument than paleontologists, who have a different argument than physicists. They hate each other because none of them agrees with each other. And yet most of you don't know that. You think scientists believe? Really? Which ones? That's the way this works. Which ones? Ask yourself 4 questions, and we're going to start with this tomorrow. Is it true that Christianity discourages any attempt to understand the natural world? Are modern scientists really so unlikely to believe in God? And if so, why? That's really important. And then 4, if many scientists are atheists, does that make atheism more likely to be true? I think you're going to be surprised that there are easy answers to all of these things. But in the meantime, you need to know this. Scientists not believing in God is very common in America, and in Britain, and in Europe. But in many places in the world, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to believe in God, which would indicate it's not about knowledge, it's about the system of education in the country. But we'll talk about that tomorrow, shall we? When we talk about, is the Bible bad? All right? Do you have any questions you'd like for me to answer tonight?
Yeah, we talked about dinosaurs and maybe the age of creation.
Okay. He asked, and I have to repeat it for the recording, dinosaurs in the age of creation. This is a hill I will not die on. Do you know what that phrase means? There are those that live and die by the gospel of Ken Ham in Cincinnati, that everything has to have been done in 6 days period regardless, and the ark had room for leopards and everything else. I'm not with them on that one, but I respect them. I don't fight them. They're my brothers and sisters in Christ. They have some good arguments. But there's evidence that would indicate that God was telling a story to explain that he made things, but was not trying to give Moses a scientific treatise on how it was done. Now, when it comes to dinosaurs, I'm not an expert in the field at all. I say SARS, by the way, because that's how it's pronounced. Sorry. Dinosaur. Dinosaur means terrible lizard. Dinosaur means bad boo-boo, I guess. I'm not really sure, but I'm aware that Americans call it dinosaur. Anyway, there were lots of them. I've even met people that have said to me to this day, I think the devil created those bones and put them in there. Seriously? Seriously? No. God makes lots of big stuff. In the book of Job, he talks about Behemoth. Have you ever read these? Anyway, right. And I believe that it is very possible that he is referring to dinosaurs there, because whenever I look at the description there, it doesn't look like an alligator and a hippopotamus, which is what a lot of modern folk have tried to make it. Do we still have dinosaurs? Well, people will tell you no. We haven't been everywhere. And what we see sometimes surprises us. I've been up close and personal with Komodo dragons before. I'm going with we still have dinosaurs. Those things are nasty, and they smell. Anyway, I could tell you so many stories. I was raised in 7 countries. You know, my family was military. We've been 300 years, British Royal Marines or Scottish Black Watch units, and so I've been everywhere. I don't know how many countries I worked in. We tried to count, actually, and lost track of how many. But again, do you have to? Right, here we go. John chapter 1 says that the Word of God is Jesus Christ. That's what we have to agree about. Everything else we can work on. We can negotiate. But we've got to agree upon Jesus Christ. Where I am right now is not where Ken Ham is right now. Do I believe Ken is an idiot? By no means. Everything I've ever heard about him, he's a gentleman and a kind individual. I'm just not where he is scientifically. I could be wrong, but I do still believe I'm saved because I believe in Jesus Christ. We're not saved by perfect knowledge, we're saved by a perfect Savior. All right? So, I am willing to listen to all sides and read all sides. But, and that probably has left everybody in here frustrated. But I have to be honest, I'm not going to lie to you on this. Interesting segue. I watched my 7-year-old play basketball last night, and he's kind of a phenom. He's amazing. And then a friend of ours talked to my 4-year-old, the scientific method kid, and said, I found some dinosaur eggs. Do you want them? And I'm looking over at him going, oh, because it's possible. And he brought him a nest that had been blown out of a tree during a storm with some little bird eggs. Well, scientists believe that birds are actually the descendants of dinosaurs, and the reason is because of some anatomical things. Maybe. I'm not there yet. So I don't make any side happy at this point. I just keep going, keep feeding the evidence. Keep feeding the evidence. But we got room for this. One of our problems is when our little boys start loving dinosaurs and we start trying to tell them, don't do that because we love Jesus. That's a problem. Let them get more information. We'll figure it out. There was another. Did you say something? Were you about to? Oh. Any other? Oh. If you want to put your question down on a piece of paper and put it in a box or basket back there, I'll deal with it tomorrow. Unless I don't know anything about it, in which case I'll say, I don't know anything about this. But I do know a lot of smart people, so I could probably direct you to where you could get the answer. Thank you. I've gone over time. Sorry. Well, no charge. I'll hand it back over to you then, shall I?